Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner, and I'm pleased to be joined today by our Fire Chief and Division of Fire and Rescue Services Director, Tom Owens. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jan.
So I'm happy to have you on today. The fire service is in the news from time to time, and we've been in the news recently with some good news that the county was awarded a federal SAFER grant for $6.3 million, which will allow us to hire 41 additional firefighters sooner. So can you tell us a little bit about the grant, what it will mean to the Division of Fire and Rescue Services?
Sure. SAFER is, first of all, for the viewers, an acronym, SAFER. It stands for Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. This is a federal grant program that came about shortly after September 11th, as a matter of fact. So it's been around for quite a number of years, and it's really designed to provide localities based on need with funding for two purposes. First is for hiring additional firefighters in order to improve staffing of fire rescue units to meet firefighter safety standards contained in our national professional qualification standards. And the second grant opportunity through SAFER is for recruitment, primarily for volunteer recruitment. Several years ago, SAFER grant was awarded to Frederick County for recruitment, and we hired a full-time recruiter for our volunteers and have recruited over 400 volunteers into our system over the 4 years of that particular grant. The hiring program is a little different. It's a 2-year full salary and benefit funding. No local matching dollars are required. So what we've been able to do is submit an application to the Federal Emergency Management Agency that goes through a nationwide competitive process with other fire departments seeking like funding. And it is scored by subject matter experts from other fire departments all across the country that are a part of FEMA's peer review group for their SAFER grants. The scoring really is based on what you demonstrate as your need for these additional personnel and what your financial ability is for your local jurisdiction to hire them themselves or inability to hire themselves. We felt going in that we had a fairly strong application because of the current way we provide staffing to support our volunteer stations currently. We put a small number of personnel in a station. The problem is, in Frederick, virtually all of our stations deliver both firefighting services and ambulance service from the same location. So when you have a small number of career people, they really have to react to the first called unit to make their staffing to respond to deliver that service. When that happens, in the business we refer to that as single pull. So we have enough career people to pull one tactical unit out of the station, but the rest of those units, if there are not adequate volunteers available, remain unstaffed and in many cases unavailable to serve the community. So that gives us a particular problem, particularly with our emergency medical services. If we put 3 career people to respond to a fire call, in many cases the ambulance is completely unavailable to that particular community.
Or a second call.
For the second call. So what this SAFER grant does is allow us to move forward sooner with the transitional plan that you and I have discussed to begin to transition our fire rescue system away from station staffing or single pull staffing to dedicated tactical unit staffing, which is the way most fire rescue services, particularly here in the metropolitan Washington area, operate.
Well, many of our stations have 2 calls at a time too, particularly within our urban and suburban areas. So
they do, and then in addition there are many incidents which require both the fire suppression engine and the ambulance out of that same station to respond together. When that happens, the other dynamic that makes our current staffing system rather unsafe for our fire rescue personnel is in a station where both units are required, we would put 2 career people on the ambulance to respond to make up the ambulance crew. And then that engine would come out with the 3rd career person as only a driver, again, if there are no volunteers available. A driver-only unit is tactically ineffective. One person arriving with a piece of fire apparatus while they've gotten the vehicle to the scene, they are very limited in terms of what person can do to meet the mission of that particular unit. There are just a number of hazards associated with a driver-only unit. The person has to drive the vehicle, they have to talk on the radio to the communications center, they have the computer-aided dispatch computer there that's giving them additional information about the incident. So without that other crew members on that unit, there are built-in distractions to the point where many of our operating procedures have to be discarded. So they can't communicate with the computer terminal. They do very limited radio communication just because their full time and attention needs to be getting that vehicle to the scene safely. Yes.
Yep. And when they get there, we all know the rule of 2 in, 2 out, and so they can only do a limited amount of work on a fire when they arrive. They can maybe hook up the hose and point the hose at the fire, but they can't enter the building. And in
a life-threatening situation, I mean, we just violate that rule. And we do it to protect the risk to our community. And in fact, we just had a live incident where that occurred a couple of months ago in Brunswick. We had an ambulance crew that arrived, the career staffed ambulance out of Brunswick. The volunteer staffed engine out of the fire station was coming behind them. But they had an immediate life threat. A woman was trapped in that home. They put their protective equipment on, made an entry without a hose line to suppress that fire. Fortunately, they came out of that very well, did make the rescue of the woman, and she's alive today just because of the heroic effort of those 2 personnel that arrived first and just did what the situation called for. But at their great personal risk in that situation with an active fire, there were oxygen tanks in there that were feeding that blaze. It was just a very, very dangerous situation that they chose to take action with.
So what all of that means is that we need these 41 additional firefighters. And of course, in the most recent budget request, you had requested, I believe, 36 positions, and our volunteer companies had supported that request for those staffing. And in the budget, because of the financial constraints of the budget, we had approved 12 when the budget was ultimately passed. So I think what's important for people to recognize is this grant really helps us to accelerate adding the people that we need, and that over the next 2 or 3 years, we were planning to add these people as we could afford to add them. So it really allows us to get to where we need to be to have a tactical unit staffing plan in place, and that's a great benefit to our community. But at the 3rd year, when the grant runs out, we're still going to be where we had planned to be anywhere from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, and I think it's important, you know, when the budget request came into you, the staffing plan was included as a part of the justification for those 36, and it actually charts out the next several fiscal years that we were going to attempt to follow to transition to tactical unit staffing in our stations. So if you really look at the SAFER grant, not only the point of acceleration, but we get 2 years worth of service at no local cost to our citizens. Yeah. So we're bringing these folks in ahead of the schedule based on what our own county budget can bear, being able to improve our service delivery so it's tactically more effective for our citizens. It stops this robbing Peter to pay Paul and leaving units out of service in certain communities in favor of one response over the other. It makes the staffing level much more safer for our firefighters that are at work today by augmenting their staffing and making it safer level for them to operate with. I would also note the other thing is that this is 2 years worth of federal tax money that citizens of Frederick County pay. Over $6 million is coming right back here to Frederick County. To be used here to meet a public safety mission right here in our local communities. This entire program of the federal government this year was $345 million to be awarded nationwide. Somebody was going to get that $6 million. Right. In our case, because of the application, the strength of our justified need, those dollars are coming back to Frederick County to serve its citizens. So.
Well, I'm certainly very pleased by that, and I think all of our residents and taxpayers should be. So tell us a little bit about how this will be implemented. Obviously, we're going to have to run recruit classes and have training. So what's your plan to actually put these 41 positions into place?
Well, we've operated under the assumption that we had a very strong application, so the staff started planning for this hiring some time ago. With the support of your staff, the CAO, and our Human Resources Department, we actually started our hiring process through competitive testing back in April. And as we sit here today, we have a qualified candidate pool ready to be hired. The first recruit class is planned to be 24 recruits. We try to balance that number so that we're keeping the proper student-instructor ratio so that they end up with the best opportunity to complete the academic and skill requirements in order to graduate from the academy. That's a 5.5-month process. It's going to take 3 recruit classes to fill this need, not only for the SAFER grant positions, but for the other positions in the county budget, including a number of vacancies that our agency has experienced just through its normal attrition. So it really is a total of 64 firefighters total that we will train through 3 recruit classes. The second class is charted to begin in December, the third class next April. And that is going to require some overlap, so our fire rescue training facility is going to be a very busy place for a number of months. But we're very confident that logistically we can manage this pretty much accelerated program to bring these folks through and get them out into the fire stations as soon as possible.
A lot of thinking, a lot of planning that went into making sure that we not only submitted a great grant application that obviously was very good because it was funded in a very competitive process, but that we could implement it and hire and train all the people that we needed once it was awarded to us.
And I wanted to go back and touch on your point about where our volunteer corporations are in this. That original budget request that came to you for 36 was a direct result of a number of our volunteer fire rescue corporations asking for additional career staff support during the budget process. So the plan that was submitted really charts out how the county might be able to meet those requests. So the other thing SAFER does is it allows our volunteer corporations to get the staff support that they've been seeking for quite a number of years. Through the recession, the county just was not able to get there. Things are getting better, albeit slowly, and there's still a number of unmet needs that I know you're challenged by as the county executive. And we're very sensitive to that concern, and so striking that balance of what the county might be able to afford and the great benefit that this SAFER grant brings us is going to allow us to really accelerate our ability to meet the needs of the community, the requests of our volunteer corporations, and make our operations a lot safer.
Well, I think it's important that you point out that the request for positions was supported by our volunteer corporations. We do run a combined system in Frederick County. Our volunteer corporations still provide and own most of our fire stations, a lot of the equipment, and we still certainly have volunteers who run on calls. But the county has changed over time, as has the fire service. Obviously, the level of training that's required is much higher than it was 20 or 30 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And call volume has gone up, particularly in the parts of the county where we've seen population growth.
Yes. We're approaching 40,000 emergency fire rescue incidents a year. And I think what's important to talk about that number a little bit, Jan, is that when we talk about this issue of single pull staffing and the frequency with which we place a unit out of service in favor of the other, the logic actually follows that the more incidents that we're called to respond to, the more frequently we could be leaving a community at risk with no ambulance available or sending a piece of fire apparatus out with only a driver on it. So this is really the nucleus of the problem that we're trying to solve, and this grant is going to let us deal with those challenges much sooner than we might otherwise.
Well, I'm very excited about it. I think this grant is very good for the citizens of Frederick County. It's good for our fire service, and it really is, I think, a good partnership with our federal partners, and we appreciate the hard work your agency, you and your staff have done to apply for this grant and to really be ready for it. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for joining me today, and I want to thank our viewers for joining us. And I hope you learned a little bit more about the good news that we have in Frederick County with this $6.3 million federal grant to help us support our fire service. Thank you for joining us.